It was a resting place. My chest tightened as understanding crept in, slow and heavy. Predators don't leave things like this behind. They don't organize. They don't return to the same place unless it matters. Something about this place mattered. A sound behind me made me flinch. Not footsteps, not breathing. A soft shift, like weight settling into the ground. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No shadows broke away. But the feeling was there again, that sense of being watched from multiple directions at once. Like I was standing in the center of something cinematic, photorealistic, 4K shot of an old man, 58 years old, sitting alone in a dimly lit, quiet living room, with deep shadows emphasizing a sense of unspoken burdens and lingering fear. A symbolic, photorealistic, 4K image of distorted, elongated shadows reaching from beneath disturbed earth, suggesting buried secrets that are slowly resurfacing in a horror story style. A vast 4K cinematic shot of an endless night sky over a desolate, silhouetted landscape, where the profound silence feels heavy and pregnant with a returning, unseen presence. A photorealistic 4K cinematic landscape of northern New Mexico, with a narrow, winding dirt road disappearing into a dense, ancient forest under a sky that feels unnaturally expansive. A lone younger figure, the protagonist, stands in a clearing within a dense, serene forest, bathed in dappled sunlight, a sense of deep solitude and connection to nature, 4K photorealistic. A cinematic, 4K morning scene in a calm forest. The sun rises, casting long, soft shadows, with an implied soundscape of subtle wind through trees and distant bird calls, feeling deceptively peaceful. A photorealistic 4K close-up on a quiet forest, suddenly and unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, only the subtle shimmer of heat haze and an overwhelming eerie silence that speaks of disruption. The protagonist stands motionless in a deeply quiet forest, hands slightly clenched, their breath visible in the cold air, unnerved by the unnatural stillness, captured in a 4K cinematic shot. A cinematic photorealistic 4K image of a forest interior with long distorted shadows and a heavy unseen pressure, creating a strong feeling of being watched patiently from a distance. A determined, slightly weary figure walks deeper into a dense, shadowy forest, ignoring internal alarms, the path ahead obscured by encroaching brush, rendered in 4K photorealistic detail. A 4K photorealistic cinematic scene depicting a figure walking through a subtle, creeping fog in an old forest, conveying a slow, settling dread rather than sudden fear, emphasizing weariness. A cinematic 4K view of disturbed ground in a deep forest, with overturned soil and broken undergrowth, hinting at a place that feels inherently wrong, illuminated by an unsettling dim light. A nostalgic cinematic 4K image of a young boy, the protagonist, walking with his father through an old sun-dappled forest, the father pointing to details on the ground, teaching him to read the land. A quiet, photorealistic 4K village nestled at the edge of vast woods, distant, mist-shrouded hills in the background, conveying a sense of respect for unseen boundaries with soft, muted colors. A dramatic, cinematic 4K shot of a father's silhouette pointing towards a dark, shadowed valley in the distance, an ominous sky above, implying a warning about forbidden places. A focused, confident protagonist in their prime stands with surveying equipment ready for remote work against a backdrop of rugged wilderness, presented in a 4K photorealistic style. An older protagonist stands pensively at the edge of a familiar but now subtly altered forest, seeking solace but finding only a heavy, anticipatory atmosphere, depicted in a 4K cinematic style. A cinematic 4K photorealistic shot of dense, forgotten woods, where the light feels heavier and the trees seem to press in, creating a sense of being remembered by the landscape itself. A vivid 4K memory flashback, the serious face of the protagonist's father looking into the trees, uttering a silent warning about listening to the ground, with a deep forest background. A determined protagonist pushing forward, ignoring rising unease, Walking on a fading trail into dense brush, the path ahead shrouded in mystery, captured in a 4K photorealistic cinematic shot. A symbolic 4K photorealistic image of unseen boundary lines in a deep forest, with light subtly shifting as the protagonist crosses into a zone of heightened, unsettling quiet. A sharp cinematic 4K contrast, the forest floor abruptly altered, with a distinct shift in light and shadow, signaling the first undeniable sign that something is profoundly wrong. A 4K photorealistic cinematic shot of a truck parked on a desolate dirt road, surrounded by a basin of tall dark pines and jagged rocks, the air still and heavy with an oppressive silence. A protagonist walks slowly down an overgrown, barely visible trail in a muted forest, every step sounding too loud, a strong sense of unseen eyes following from the dense tree line, 4K. A close-up 4K photorealistic shot of unusual footprints pressed into the soft forest soil, long, narrow, unnaturally spaced, with an unsettling quality that suggests something non-human. A cinematic 4K image capturing a fleeting, barely perceptible flicker of movement high on a distant ridge, just a shift in shadow, leaving the viewer to question its reality in a horror style. A protagonist stands still in the deep woods, trying to rationalize unsettling observations, the forest around them unnaturally quiet, a sense of mounting psychological unease. 4K photorealistic. A harrowing 4K cinematic scene, a lone figure in a frozen, silent forest, suddenly hearing distinct, slow, measured footsteps matching their own pace from an unseen source, amplifying dread. A foreboding 4K photorealistic shot of a narrow, shadowed passage between two rocky slopes, the air thick with a sharp, metallic smell, leading into deeper mystery in a horror setting. A blurry, fleeting 4K glimpse of a tall, indistinct shape among distant trees, not quite solid, vanishing as soon as the protagonist tries to focus, creating intense psychological horror. A symbolic 4K image of diverging paths in the forest, one leading away from the protagonist, implying an unseen entity has already passed through, deepening the sense of being manipulated. A protagonist walks through a dark, narrowing forest path, feeling an unseen presence subtly guiding them deeper, the trees ahead forming an ominous funnel, captured in a 4K cinematic style. A 4K photorealistic close-up of deeply unsettling footprints crossing a forest trail at an unnatural angle, showing an abnormally dug heel and stretched front, hinting at an alien anatomy. A protagonist's whispered words in the silent forest, the sound dull and flat, absorbed by the trees, highlighting a supernatural muting effect and increasing isolation in a 4K horror style. A dramatic 4K close-up on deeply etched, deliberate scratches running impossibly high on the bark of a pine tree, hinting at a powerful non-human marker in the silent woods. A protagonist stands at a crossroads of decision in a shadowy forest, torn between primal fear and stubborn curiosity, a faint, hidden path beckoning into deeper mystery, 4K photorealistic. A cinematic 4K shot of the protagonist entering an increasingly dense part of the forest, branches closing overhead, blocking sunlight, the quiet deepening into an oppressive, heavy silence. A close-up 4K photorealistic shot of a faded old scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush on a remote path, suggesting a past, unsettling presence and a lingering mystery. A harrowing 4K cinematic view of a narrow, dark break between jagged rocks, the path ahead disappearing into deep shadows, signifying a point of no return for the protagonist. A suspenseful 4K shot of the protagonist pausing on a forest path, a soft, unsettling sound from directly behind them, too close to be coincidence, creating immediate dread. A small, quiet campfire burning low in a forest clearing at night, surrounded by an oppressive cold and a heavy, unnatural silence, emphasizing isolation and vulnerability. 4K cinematic. A protagonist sits hunched by a dim fire, listening intently, eyes wide with paranoia, every rustle and creak of the forest magnified in the oppressive night. A 4K photorealistic horror scene. A sudden 4K cinematic shot. The protagonist, flashlight sweeping frantically across empty tree trunks and deep shadows after a soft scrape, seeing nothing but darkness where the light dies. A tense 4K photorealistic close-up on a forest floor at night. A dry, deliberate snap of a branch, just out of sight, implying a heavy, unseen presence shifting its weight nearby. A protagonist holds their breath in a cold, dark clearing, listening to a barely there steady breathing just beyond the firelight, the air thick with unseen menace, 4K horror style. A chilling 4K cinematic shot of a protagonist slowly turning in a circle, flashlight beam futilely trying to catch unseen footsteps carefully circling their camp, never stepping into the light. A dramatic 4K close-up on a tree trunk in the dark, with 3 distinct short knocks echoing from it, an eerie, deliberate pattern signaling a non-human intelligence testing the protagonist. NG's attention. I backed away from the opening, every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone. The ground near my boot showed fresh disturbance. Soil pressed down recently, overlapping my own tracks from the day before. It hadn't left during the night. It had gone back here. I stood there, frozen, realizing I wasn't just trespassing anymore. I'd found something private, something hidden on purpose. And whatever owned this place knew I was standing right above where it slept. The forest around me stayed silent, too still to feel natural. And deep down, I understood something that made my blood run cold. I hadn't discovered this place by accident. I'd been led to it. I didn't hear it approach. One moment, the forest felt empty, too empty, and the next, the air around me changed. It thickened, like the space behind my neck had filled with something solid. My skin prickled, every nerve screaming at once. I knew, without turning, that I wasn't alone anymore. The breathing started first, slow, controlled, close enough that I could feel it move the air near my ear. I stayed still. I didn't even blink. My eyes were locked on the dark opening in the ground, my mind racing through every bad decision that had brought me there. The smell of copper was overwhelming now, mixed with something rotten and damp, like old leaves left too long in the rain. A soft crunch came from the dirt behind me. One step, then another. Each movement was careful, deliberate, like it didn't want to scare me away too fast. I could feel its presence towering over me, wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too close. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I forced myself to turn. What I saw didn't make sense at first. My eyes struggled to settle on it, like my brain refused to finish the picture. It stood just beyond arm's reach, half hidden by shadow, its shape bent slightly forward as if it was trying to fit into a posture it didn't understand. Its limbs were too long, not twisted, just stretched, like they'd been pulled past where they should stop. The skin looked dull in the low light, tight in some places, loose in others. But it was the face, or what passed for one, that locked me in place. It wasn't fully formed. The features were there, but wrong, like someone had tried to remember a human face from a distance and failed. The eyes reflected the dim light, glassy and unblinking. They weren't angry. They weren't wild. They were curious. It tilted its head slowly, the movement stiff and uneven. As it did, the bones in its neck shifted with a quiet sound that made my stomach turn. The breathing grew louder, deeper, like it was testing how much noise it could make without sending me running. I couldn't move. The thing leaned closer, just enough that I could see faint marks along its skin, old scratches, scars layered over scars. This wasn't the first time it had been wounded, or watched. Its mouth opened slightly. For a moment, I thought it was going to speak again. Instead, it made a sound halfway between a breath and a whisper. Not a word, just a shape of one. Like it was practicing. Then it did something that scared me more than anything else. It stepped aside. Slowly. Carefully. It wanted me to look past it. Beyond the creature, I could see the entrance to the hollow more clearly now. The worn ground. The pressed earth. The place where it rested. Slept. Hid. The realization hit me all at once, sharp and heavy. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a presentation. The Skinwalker, because by then I knew exactly what I was standing in front of, was showing me something on purpose. It wanted me to understand where I was, what I'd found. The eyes flicked back to me, holding my gaze. A silent question hung between us. My legs finally unlocked, trembling so badly I thought I'd collapse. I took a slow step back, then another. The creature didn't follow. It only watched, breathing steady, patient as ever. As I retreated, one thought burned through the fear, clear and terrifying. If it wanted me gone, I would already be dead. And if it wanted me here, that was far worse. Should I have turned and run the moment it stepped out of the shadows? Or would that have been exactly what it wanted? I backed away until my calves brushed against a fallen log, then stopped. The Skinwalker didn't move to block me. It didn't rush. It didn't bare teeth or make a sound of warning. It just watched, head tilted slightly, eyes tracking every breath I took. That was when I realized something was wrong in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't angry. The forest around us stayed frozen, like the moment had been stretched thin. No birds returned. No wind moved the branches. Even the light felt dimmer, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. My fear shifted into something heavier, confusion mixed with a growing sense of dread. I took another step back. The creature mirrored me, not forward, sideways. It placed itself between me and the narrow path I'd come down, cutting off my clean exit without ever charging. The movement was smooth, almost practiced. It knew the terrain better than I did, knew where to stand to guide me without touching me. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. The Skinwalker's chest rose and fell slowly. Then it made that sound again, that half-formed whisper. This time it shaped itself closer to a word. The noise crawled under my skin like hearing someone speak through water. It turned its head toward the hollow, then back to me. That's when the truth started to sink in. This wasn't a warning, and it wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. My heart pounded harder as I shook my head. "I don't want to," I said, louder than I meant to. My voice sounded thin, weak in the open air. The creature didn't react to the words, only the tone. Its eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. It stepped closer, not fast, not sudden. Close enough that I could see the fine details now, the way its skin didn't quite sit right over the bones beneath it, the subtle twitching like muscles remembering how to work. The copper smell was overwhelming, filling my nose, my mouth, my lungs. Then it did something I still don't understand. It turned its back on me. For a long second, I thought it was leaving. My legs tensed, ready to run the moment it gave me space. But it only took a few steps toward the hollow and stopped. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered itself to one knee beside the opening. It bowed its head. The meaning hit me so hard I felt dizzy. This place wasn't just where it slept. It was important. Sacred in a way that had nothing to do with rituals or symbols, only repetition, memory, and time. This creature didn't wander the forest randomly. It returned here, protected this place, and now, for reasons I couldn't understand, it wanted me to see it properly, to witness it. My stomach twisted as the Skinwalker lifted its head again and looked at me. Not as prey, not as a threat, but as something necessary, something chosen. I took a step forward before I could stop myself. The ground felt different under my boot, firmer, packed down by years of use. The creature watched closely but didn't move to stop me. Every instinct I had told me this was a mistake, but another voice, quieter, colder, told me I was already past the point of choice. Then the Skinwalker spoke again. Not my father's voice this time, my own. "You need to see," it said. Perfectly. Calmly. That was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't hunting me. It wasn't protecting its territory. It needed me, needed a witness to what was buried here. And as the ground beneath the hollow seemed to slope deeper than it should have, I understood with terrifying clarity that I was no longer being led. I was being brought in. I don't remember deciding to move closer. I just remember realizing I already had. The hollow looked deeper now, wider than it had before, like the ground itself had relaxed once I stepped near it. The edges were worn smooth by years of contact, not erosion, use. I crouched slowly, keeping the Skinwalker in the corner of my vision. It hadn't followed me inside the small clearing, but I could feel its attention on me, heavy and unblinking. That's when the details started to line up. The smell wasn't just copper anymore. There was iron in it. Old blood. The kind that doesn't belong to one body or one moment. It clung to the back of my throat, and no matter how shallow my breaths were, I couldn't escape it. I noticed markings in the dirt near the entrance. Not symbols, not drawings. Drag marks. Long, uneven lines where something heavy had been pulled in and out over time. Mixed in with them were footprints, many sets, layered on top of one another. Some looked human, some didn't. The human ones were wrong in small ways. Toes stretched too far forward, heels pressed too deep, as if the feet that made them were still learning how to carry weight properly. I felt cold all over as I realized those prints changed shape the farther they went. Near the hollow they grew longer, narrower. I'd heard stories growing up. Everyone had. Whispers told around campfires or late at night when the work was done. Most people laughed them off or changed the subject. But the details came back to me now with painful clarity. Mimicry. Resting places. The smell of metal. I straightened slowly, my joints stiff, my heart racing. The Skinwalker stood where it had before, just inside the tree line. It looked different now that I knew what I was seeing. The way its body didn't settle naturally. The way its shadow didn't match its shape exactly, stretching and pulling in the wrong direction. Its eyes followed mine as I looked from the hollow back to it, almost expectant. "You wear them," I whispered, my voice barely there. "Don't you?" The creature didn't respond with words. Instead, its shape shifted. Subtle. Slow. The slope of its shoulders changed. The line of its jaw tightened, then softened. Not a full transformation, just enough to show me it could. The realization hit me harder than fear. This thing wasn't pretending to be human. It was borrowing humanity the way someone borrows clothes. The voices. My father's voice. My own. The careful patience. The way it waited instead of attacked. All of it fit together in a way that made my stomach churn. This wasn't an animal. It was older than that. I took a shaky step back, my heel catching on a root. The Skinwalker reacted instantly. Not lunging, not threatening, but stepping forward just enough to keep me from falling. Its movement was impossibly fast, then perfectly still again. Control. That's what terrified me most. It wasn't wild. It wasn't driven by hunger alone. Everything it did was measured, intentional, learned. As I steadied myself, the creature tilted its head and let out a low sound, almost like a sigh. Then, slowly, it lifted one hand and pointed toward the hollow again. I understood then that this wasn't just proof of what it was. This was evidence of what it wanted me to see next. And whatever lay deeper beneath that ground was the reason it had let me live this long. The distance between us felt smaller, even though neither of us moved. The Skinwalker stood just inside the trees, its shape half lit by the thin daylight filtering through the branches. Every time I shifted my weight, it adjusted its stance, subtle and exact, like it was correcting for me. I had the sudden, chilling thought that it wasn't reacting anymore. It was predicting. The forest began to feel tighter, like the air itself had thickened. I could hear my own pulse again, loud and uneven, thudding in my ears. The hollow behind me seemed to breathe, the darkness inside it deeper than before, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. I took a slow step back. The Skinwalker matched it, closing the distance just enough that I could see the faint texture of its skin. It wasn't smooth. It carried impressions. Creases, scars, places where it had been cut or burned long ago. Evidence of time, of survival, I'm 58 years old now, and there are parts of my life I still don't talk about. Not with my family, not with friends. Some things stay buried because once you dig them up, they don't go back the same way. I've learned that the hard way. What happened to me didn't just scare me in the moment, it followed me, quietly, for decades. I'm only saying something now because the nights have been getting longer again, and the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. This happened a long time ago, back when I was still strong enough to believe I understood the land. It was in northern New Mexico, outside a small town most people pass through without stopping. The kind of place where the road narrows, the trees grow closer together, and the sky feels bigger than it should. Back then, the wilderness felt familiar, honest. It had rules. If you respected it, it respected you back. At least, that's what I believed. I worked outdoors most of my life, surveying, checking property lines, marking trails for future development that never really came. I spent more time alone in the woods than with people. That wasn't something I minded. Solitude made sense to me. The quiet gave me space to think, to breathe. I trusted my instincts, trusted my experience. I thought fear was something that only came when you made mistakes. Life was simple in those days. I woke before sunrise, drank my coffee while the air was still cold, and listened to the wind move through the trees. The seasons were steady. The forest had a rhythm, birds at dawn, insects at dusk, coyotes calling far off at night. Even the silence had a shape to it. It was never truly quiet, just calm. But that calm didn't last. It started with small things. Nothing dramatic, just a feeling that something was off. Trails I knew by heart felt longer than they should. Sounds didn't carry the same way. Sometimes the woods went completely still, like everything had paused at once. No birds, no wind, just me and my own breathing. I remember stopping once, standing there longer than I meant to, waiting for the forest to start up again. I told myself it was nothing. Weather changes. Animals move on. That's what the mind does. It fills in gaps so you don't have to sit with the unknown. But the feeling stayed, a quiet pressure in my chest, like I was being watched, not closely, but patiently. I didn't talk about it back then. Men didn't, especially not about things they couldn't explain. I kept working, kept walking deeper into places most people avoided. There was a sense of responsibility tied to it, like if I turned back, I was admitting something I wasn't ready to face. Looking back now, I can see how tired I was, how worn down. Fear doesn't always come loud and fast. Sometimes it settles in slowly, convincing you that it's just part of getting older, part of being alone too long. I ignored the signs because acknowledging them meant changing my path. Everything changed the day I found the place I wasn't meant to see. I didn't know what it was at first, just that the land around it felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. Even now, all these years later, I can still remember the smell in the air and the way the ground looked disturbed, not fresh, but used. That was the moment the forest stopped feeling like home and started feeling like something that had been waiting for me. My family had been tied to that stretch of land long before I ever set foot there alone. Not by ownership, not officially, but through work and time. My father spent years doing seasonal jobs in the area, fencing, logging support, trail clearing. When I was a kid, he'd take me with him during the summers. I learned early how to read the ground, how to tell when a trail was old or freshly used, how to notice when animals stopped moving through an area altogether. Those trips shaped me more than school ever did. The woods felt like a second home, and the people in town treated the land with a kind of quiet respect. Nobody bragged about it. Nobody romanticized it. You just understood there were places you didn't linger, valleys you passed through without stopping, and hills you didn't camp on no matter how tired you were. My father never explained why. He didn't have to. He just said, "Some ground doesn't like being disturbed." Back then, I thought it was just an old saying meant to keep kids cautious. I didn't realize how literal he meant it. As I got older, I followed a similar path. Outdoor work came naturally to me. I trusted my hands, my eyes, my sense of direction. By the time this story takes place, I was already known as someone who could handle remote assignments without complaint. If a job required long hours alone, far from town, my name came up. I took pride in that. Being dependable felt like something solid to hold on to. That's why no one questioned it when I volunteered to check the northern boundary lines again. It was land most people avoided, not dangerous, just forgotten. Too rough for development, too quiet for recreation. The kind of place where trails faded into brush and trees grew close enough to block the sky. There was also a personal reason I didn't talk about. My father had passed a few years before, and returning to those woods felt like stepping back into something familiar, like walking into an old memory where things still made sense. I told myself it was work, but part of me wanted the quiet, wanted the distance from people and questions. The first day back out there, I noticed changes right away. Not obvious ones. The land itself looked the same. Same ridges. Same tree lines. But the feeling was different. Heavier. Like the place remembered me, even if I didn't want it to. I kept thinking about something my father once said years ago while we were packing up a site early. He'd gone quiet all of a sudden, staring into the trees. When I asked what was wrong, he told me never to follow signs that didn't make sense. If the ground is telling you to turn around, he said, listen. At the time, I laughed it off. I was young, confident. I believed experience made me immune to fear. Standing there years later, alone with the wind barely moving the branches, that memory came back stronger than it should have. I brushed it aside and kept walking. That was the pattern of my life then, pushing forward, trusting routine over instinct. I didn't realize how deeply my family's history with that land had already marked me, or that by returning, I was stepping into something that had been left unfinished. The deeper I went, the more I felt it, that subtle sense of being out of place, like I was crossing a line my family had known about, even if I hadn't. And by the time I noticed the first real sign that something was wrong, it was already too late to pretend I hadn't seen it. The deeper I drove in, the worse the silence got. At first it was just the usual quiet you expect once pavement turns to dirt. Tires crunching over gravel, wind brushing through pine needles. But after a while, even those sounds felt muted, like the forest was swallowing them whole. When I finally parked and stepped out of the truck, the quiet pressed in around me so hard I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood there longer than I needed to, scanning the tree line. The land opened up into a shallow basin, surrounded by tall pines and jagged rock. I'd been here before, years ago, but it didn't look the way I remembered. The trees felt closer together, the shadows thicker, the air colder, even though the sun was already up. I grabbed my gear and started walking. The trail was still there, but barely. Grass and brush had grown over parts of it, like something had been deliberately left alone for a long time. Every few steps I caught myself listening for something I couldn't name. Birds should have been calling by then. Insects should have been moving. But there was nothing. Just my boots against the dirt and the faint sound of my breathing. About half a mile in, I noticed the first thing that made me stop. Footprints. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either, pressed deep into the soil near the edge of the trail. Too long to be deer, too narrow to be elk. I crouched down and studied them, telling myself they were from a hiker who'd passed through days earlier. Still, something about them bothered me. The spacing was wrong. Too far apart, like whoever made them didn't walk the way people do. I straightened up and kept going, but the feeling stayed with me. That's when I started noticing movement. Not clear shapes, just shifts. A shadow pulling back behind a tree, a flicker of motion high up on a ridge to my left. Each time I stopped to look, there was nothing there. No sound of retreat. No snapped branches. Just empty woods staring back at me. My instincts told me to leave, to turn around and head back while it was still early. But I didn't. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, that fear only had power if you fed it. Then I heard footsteps that weren't mine, slow, measured, matching my pace. I stopped. They stopped. I waited, held my breath. The forest stayed frozen, like it was listening too. When nothing else happened, I forced myself to move again. This time the steps didn't return, but the feeling of being followed didn't fade either. The land dipped downward ahead, forming a narrow stretch between two rocky slopes. The air there smelled different, metallic, sharp. I slowed as I entered it, every sense on edge. That was when I saw something between the trees on the far side. A shape. Tall, still, not quite solid. I blinked, and it was gone. My chest tightened. I stood there, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than shadow and light. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever I'd seen hadn't moved like an animal. It hadn't moved at all, like it was waiting for me to notice it. That was when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The footprints I'd seen earlier weren't leading toward me. They were leading away, like something had already passed through the area before I arrived, and the footsteps I thought I heard behind me, they weren't following me. They were keeping pace with someone else, deeper in the forest, guiding me exactly where it wanted me to go. I should have turned back the moment that thought settled in my head, the moment I realized I wasn't alone in the way I'd assumed. But instead, I stood there staring at the dirt, trying to force logic into a place where it didn't belong. The footprints showed up again a few minutes later. This time they crossed the trail at an angle, half hidden by pine needles. I knelt down and brushed the ground with my glove. The shape was wrong. The heel dug too deep. The front stretched longer than a normal foot should. What bothered me most wasn't the size, it was the way the prints hesitated, like whoever made them had stopped, turned, then continued on a different path. I remember laughing under my breath, shaking my head. "Just old tracks," I muttered. Saying it out loud felt safer, like naming it would strip away the fear. But the sound of my own voice echoed strangely, dull and flat, like the trees didn't want to carry it. The air felt colder the farther I went. Not a clean mountain cold. This was damp, heavy, with that sharp metallic smell creeping back in. Copper. That's the only way I can describe it. I tasted it when I breathed too deep. That's when I noticed the scratches. They ran along the bark of a pine just off the trail. Deep grooves, far higher than I could reach, even standing on my toes. At first glance they looked like bear marks, but the spacing was too even, too deliberate. I traced one with my eyes and felt a chill move through me. Something had marked this place. I stood there for a long time, debating with myself. Every instinct I had told me to leave, to head back to the truck and write the area off as unsafe. But another part of me, stubborn, curious, tired of always backing away, wanted answers. I told myself I needed to know what was using this land, needed to be sure there wasn't someone living out here who could get hurt. That was the lie I used. As I stepped away from the marked tree, I noticed something else. The ground ahead sloped downward in a way that didn't match the map I'd studied. A faint path cut through the brush, barely visible unless you were looking straight at it. The plants along its edge were pressed flat, not broken like something heavy moved through there often. I followed it. The forest grew thicker almost immediately. Branches closed in overhead, blocking out the sun. The quiet returned, deeper than before. No wind, no birds, just the soft sound of my boots and the slow rhythm of my breathing. Halfway down the slope, I found a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush. Old, faded, not torn by weather but pulled free. I didn't recognize it, but seeing it there made my stomach tighten. Someone else had been here, and not recently enough to feel safe, not long enough to feel forgotten. I stood at the edge of the path, heart pounding, knowing that once I went any farther, there wouldn't be a clean way back. The trail disappeared into a narrow break between rocks, dark and shadowed even in daylight. Whatever had made those marks wanted privacy, and against every better judgment I had, I stepped forward, right as the forest behind me let out a sound that felt too close to be coincidence. What would you do if you found signs like this deep in the woods? I didn't plan to stay the night that close to the path, but by the time I checked my watch, the light was already fading. The forest seemed to darken faster than it should have, shadows stretching long and uneven between the trees. Turning back meant moving through unfamiliar ground in near darkness, and I told myself that was more dangerous than staying put. So I set up camp. The fire was small. I kept it that way on purpose. Just enough light to see my hands and the edge of the clearing. The flames didn't crackle much. Even the wood burned quietly, like it didn't want to draw attention to itself. As night settled in, the temperature dropped fast. The kind of cold that slips through layers and settles into your bones. That was when the silence returned. Not the peaceful kind. This was heavy, pressed in from all sides. I listened for the usual sounds, owls, insects, distant movement, but nothing came. It felt like the forest was holding its breath again, waiting for something I couldn't see. I tried to eat, but every sound I made felt too loud. The crinkle of packaging, the scrape of metal. I kept stopping, listening, heart beating harder each time. Eventually, I gave up and just sat there, staring into the fire, telling myself morning would come soon enough. The first noise came from behind me. A soft scrape, like something brushing against bark. I turned slowly, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just trunks and shadows and the edge of darkness where the light died out. I waited, counting my breaths, until my heart slowed enough to convince myself it had been the wind. Then a branch snapped. Close. Too close. It wasn't loud. Just a dry, deliberate sound, the kind that happens when weight shifts, not when something stumbles. I stood up, scanning the tree line again. Still nothing. No retreating footsteps. No movement at all. That's when I noticed the breathing. It wasn't heavy. Barely there. Slow, steady, just beyond the firelight. At first I thought it was my own breath echoing back at me, but when I stopped breathing, it didn't. I backed closer to the fire, pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice tight. The sound didn't travel far. It felt swallowed almost immediately. The breathing stopped. For a moment there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps. They moved around the clearing, careful and measured, never stepping into the light. Each step matched the next, like whoever, or whatever, it knew exactly where it could walk without being seen. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, catching nothing but empty ground. A knock echoed from one of the trees. Not a branch falling, not wood breaking. A knock. 3 short taps against bark. My stomach dropped. I'd heard that pattern before, years ago, during work in other remote areas. Always written off as animals or coincidence. Standing there in the dark with that breathing returning just outside the firelight, it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. The knocks came again, this time closer. A different tree. That's when it hit me. The sounds weren't random. They were testing me, watching how I reacted, learning. I backed toward my tent, never taking my eyes off the dark. My hands were shaking now. Whatever was out there wasn't panicked. It wasn't rushing. It was patient. And as I crawled into the tent and zipped it shut, I realized the worst part wasn't that something was circling my camp. It was that it knew exactly where I was, and it had no intention of leaving. I didn't sleep. I don't mean I slept badly. I mean I didn't sleep at all. I lay there inside the tent with my eyes open, staring at the dark fabric inches from my face, listening to every sound and trying to separate what was real from what my fear was inventing. The fire outside had burned down to embers, and the cold pressed in hard, stealing what little comfort I had left. The footsteps came back sometime after midnight. Slow, careful, circling. I could hear them clearly now, the weight behind each step. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide anymore. It moved just far enough away to stay unseen, but close enough that I could track it by sound alone. Leaves shifted, dirt compressed. A branch bent and creaked, then eased back into place. Then it stopped. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears rang. The silence stretched on until my chest burned. Just when I thought it might finally be gone, something brushed against the side of the tent. Light, curious, like fingers testing thin fabric. I froze. A shape moved through the faint moonlight outside, tall and uneven. I couldn't make out details, only that it stood too high to be an animal. Its outline shifted slightly, like it couldn't decide how to hold itself. The air filled again with that metallic smell, stronger now, thick enough to taste. That's when I saw the eyes. They caught the moonlight and reflected it back, low to the ground one moment, then higher the next. They didn't blink, didn't rush, just watched, studied. My hands shook as I reached for the zipper. I didn't open the tent, I barely moved it, just enough to peer through a narrow gap. The cold air rushed in, sharp and biting. The shape stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadow. And then it spoke. "Hey." The voice was calm, familiar, human. I felt my stomach drop so hard it made me dizzy. "Come on," it said softly. "You don't have to hide." It wasn't distorted. It wasn't growling or whispering. It sounded like someone standing just a few feet away, trying not to wake the rest of the house at night. I swallowed hard, telling myself not to answer, not to react. Then it said my name. Perfectly. Not mispronounced, not forced, the way only someone who'd known me for years would say it. The voice carried a tone I hadn't heard in a long time. Gentle, tired, almost concerned. My father's voice. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head, trying to block it out. He'd been gone for years. I'd stood at his grave. I knew better. But my body didn't care what I knew. Every instinct I had screamed at me to answer, to step outside, to see him again. "Come help me," the voice said. "I'm hurt." Tears burned my eyes before I could stop them. My chest tightened so much it hurt to breathe. The thing outside took a step closer, its shadow stretching toward the tent. I forced myself to stay still, forced my mouth closed. The moment passed slowly, painfully. When the voice spoke again, something was wrong with it, just slightly off, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Please." The eyes shifted. The shape moved back into the trees, vanishing as quietly as it had appeared. The footsteps faded, leaving the clearing empty and cold. I sat there until dawn, shaking, knowing one thing with terrifying certainty. Whatever was out there didn't just know how to hunt, it knew how to remember. Morning didn't bring relief the way I expected it to. The sun came up pale and weak, filtered through a layer of low cloud that hadn't been there the day before. Everything looked washed out, colorless. The fire pit was cold. The clearing felt smaller, tighter, like the trees had leaned in overnight. I packed my gear without eating, my hands still shaking from the night before. I told myself I was leaving. I even took a few steps back toward the way I'd come. But something stopped me. Not a sound, not movement, just a pull. A quiet pressure behind my eyes that told me I was standing too close to something unfinished. Whatever had spoken to me in the dark hadn't chased me away, it had waited. I followed the faint path again, moving slower this time, watching the ground with careful attention. The smell from the night before lingered, stronger in places, almost clinging to the air. Copper and damp earth mixed together. My stomach turned as the trail dipped sharply downward, hidden between thick brush and stone. The temperature dropped the farther I went. That's when I saw it. At first it looked like nothing more than a collapse in the ground, a shallow depression where soil had caved in. But as I stepped closer, the shape became clearer. The earth wasn't broken naturally. It had been hollowed out, packed down, used. The opening was just wide enough for a person to crawl through, framed by roots twisted into the dirt like fingers. The ground around it was worn smooth, darker than the surrounding soil. This wasn't new. Whatever used this place had been coming back again and again. I knelt near the edge, careful not to disturb anything. The smell was strongest there, thick enough to make my eyes water. Inside, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. Like stepping too close to a sleeping animal without seeing it yet. I noticed bones scattered just beyond the opening, not fresh, cleaned by time and weather, too small to belong to livestock. I didn't touch them, I didn't need to. Their placement told me enough. This wasn't a kill sight. It opened its mouth. This time, the voice that came out wasn't borrowed. It was wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. Too many tones layered together, overlapping, slipping in and out of rhythm. The sound didn't travel far. It seemed to sink into the ground instead. "You came," it said. The words were clear enough, but they didn't feel like speech. They felt like pressure, like something pushing against the inside of my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to drop to my knees. "I didn't mean to," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't know." The Skinwalker tilted its head, studying me again. For the first time, I felt something close to emotion coming off it. Not anger, not hunger. Expectation. It lifted one long arm and gestured toward the hollow. The movement was careful, almost respectful, like pointing out a grave. I realized then that it wasn't just showing me where it slept. It was showing me where it changed. The understanding crawled through me slowly. The hollow wasn't empty because it was resting. It was empty because something had already been taken from it. My stomach dropped as the creature took another step closer. The smell intensified, thick and heavy. My legs trembled, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go that it wouldn't cut off before I took 3 steps. "You saw," it said, the layered voice softer now. "That matters." Images flashed through my mind, faces I didn't recognize, voices half remembered, shapes moving through the woods at night. I couldn't tell if they were memories or something it was pushing into me. My head throbbed as I staggered backward, nearly losing my balance. The Skinwalker reached out, not to grab me, to steady me. Its hand hovered inches from my chest, fingers long and jointed wrong. I could feel the cold radiating off it, sharp and biting. The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. Then it pulled its hand back and stepped aside. The path into the hollow was open now, fully exposed. I understood the choice in that moment with terrifying clarity. This was as close to mercy as it was willing to give. I could walk away, try to leave, knowing it would watch, follow, remember. Or I could step forward and see what it had guarded for so long. The Skinwalker's eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "Look," it said. And as I took my first step toward the darkness beneath the earth, I realized it wasn't closing in to trap me anymore. It was closing in to make sure I didn't turn back. The air inside the hollow was colder than it should have been. The moment I stepped down into it, the sounds of the forest dulled, like I'd pushed my head underwater. The dirt walls closed in around me, packed tight and smooth from years of use. Roots pressed through the ceiling, twisting like veins. Every breath tasted of iron and damp earth, thick enough to make my head swim. I moved slowly, crouched low, one hand brushing the wall to steady myself. The ground sloped downward farther than I'd expected. This place wasn't shallow. It went deep, bending slightly, hiding what waited ahead. Behind me, I could feel the Skinwalker's presence without seeing it. Not following, not rushing. Just there, close enough to remind me I wasn't alone, far enough to let the weight of the discovery fall on me without distraction. Then I saw it. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was looking at. Shapes piled together in the darker part of the hollow. Too large to be rocks, too rounded. As my eyes adjusted, the details sharpened, and my knees nearly gave out. Bones, not scattered like before, placed. Long bones stacked carefully, skulls set facing inward, arranged in a rough circle. Some were animal, deer, elk, smaller things, but mixed in among them were others that made my stomach twist painfully. Human, old, weathered, but unmistakable. This wasn't a feeding site. It wasn't random violence. There was intention here, memory, a record of sorts. The realization pressed down on me until my chest felt tight, my breaths short and uneven. This was a collection. I staggered back against the wall, fighting the urge to scream. The thought hit me all at once, sharp and unforgiving. This thing remembered everyone it had taken, not just their bodies, but their shapes, their voices, their movements. That was when the truth finally broke through the fear. The Skinwalker didn't just sleep here, it shed here. The hollow wasn't a den, it was a place of transition, a place where it let go of old forms and prepared for new ones. The bones weren't trophies. They were reference. My vision blurred as I understood the role I'd been led into. This wasn't about territory, or hunger, or warning humans away. It needed witnesses. It needed someone alive to know this place existed, to carry the memory forward, someone who could still walk among people and remember what slept beneath the ground. A sound came from the entrance behind me, soft, almost respectful. I didn't turn. Tears ran down my face before I realized I was crying, not just from fear, but from the weight of it, from knowing that once you truly understand something like this, you can never unknow it. "I won't tell anyone," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I swear." The Skinwalker didn't answer with words. Instead, I felt it then. A shift, like the forest itself exhaled. The pressure eased just slightly, enough to let me breathe again, enough to tell me I'd said the right thing. But that relief didn't last, because as my eyes moved over the arranged bones one last time, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A space, an empty place in the circle, sized for one more. And in that moment, I understood the final truth that shattered what was left of my calm. This place wasn't finished with me yet. If you were standing where I was, knowing what it truly was, would you run the moment you were free? Or would you stay silent and carry it alone? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that empty space in the circle of bones. Time felt wrong inside the hollow, stretched thin. Every second pressed against me like weight. My legs shook so badly I had to brace myself against the wall to stay upright. That's when I felt it move. Not closer. Around me. The Skinwalker didn't enter the hollow right away. Instead, its presence shifted, circling the opening above, slow and deliberate. Dirt crumbled softly from the ceiling as something heavy adjusted its stance. I could feel it now, clearer than ever. Not just watching me, focusing on me. "You understand," it said. The voice wasn't layered this time. It wasn't mimicking anyone I loved. It wasn't trying to trick me. The sound was rough, uneven, like words dragged across stone, but the meaning landed with brutal clarity. "I think I do," I whispered. My throat felt raw. "You change here. You leave parts behind." Silence. Then a low sound came from above me. Not a growl, not a laugh. Something closer to acknowledgement. "Forms don't last," it said, "but memory does." The words settled deep in my chest, heavy and cold. Images flooded my mind again, not forced this time, but offered. Faces fading, bodies breaking down, voices slipping away. The creature didn't take shapes because it wanted to. It took them because it needed to stay. I finally turned toward the entrance. The Skinwalker stood there now, filling the opening completely. In the dim light, its body looked taller than before, broader, like it was no longer holding itself back. The bones in its frame shifted beneath its skin, subtle but constant, as if it were always on the edge of becoming something else. "You brought me here," I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth. "Yes." "Why me?" The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I felt something like recognition pass between us. "Because you would come," it said, "and because you would remember." My stomach twisted. "You want me to carry this?" "To keep it quiet," it corrected, "to let the land stay asleep." The meaning hit me hard. This place, this hollow, was a balance point. As long as it remained hidden, undisturbed, the creature stayed contained. But if it was found again, if people came digging, hunting, trying to destroy what they didn't understand, something worse would happen. The Skinwalker straightened slowly. As it did, the space around it felt tighter, heavier. The forest above groaned softly, trees shifting as if responding to its movement. I realized then that it hadn't been fully awake before. It was now. "You leave," it said. "You don't return." "And if I don't?" I asked. The creature's head tilted, just slightly. "Then you stay." My heart slammed against my ribs. The empty space in the circle burned in my mind clearer than ever. This wasn't a threat dressed up as words. It was a simple outcome. The Skinwalker stepped back from the opening, giving me room, giving me a path. Its body continued to change subtly, stretching taller, more solid, like the ground itself was feeding it. I climbed out of the hollow on shaking legs, never taking my eyes off it. As I stepped past, the creature lowered its head, not in submission, but in finality. A line had been drawn, and as I turned away, feeling the forest slowly begin to breathe again, I knew something with sick certainty. It wasn't done becoming what it was meant to be, and I had just been allowed to leave before it finished. I didn't run at first. I walked. That choice might have saved my life, or doomed me in a slower way. My legs felt weak, numb, like they didn't fully belong to me anymore. Every step away from the hollow felt heavier than the last, like the ground itself was resisting, trying to pull me back into that dark place beneath it. Behind me, the forest began to change. At first, it was subtle. A low groan passed through the trees, deep and slow, like old wood bending under pressure. The air thickened again, colder than before, sharp enough to sting my lungs. I didn't turn around, but I felt it. The Skinwalker rising, unfolding into itself fully now that its purpose was complete. Branches cracked somewhere close, not snapping, bending. I picked up my pace. The trail I remembered didn't look the same anymore. Trees leaned inward, shadows stretched long and wrong, and the ground sloped where it hadn't before. It was like the forest was rearranging itself, closing ranks behind me. Every instinct screamed that I was running out of time. Then I heard it. My footsteps. Not behind me. Beside me. Perfectly matched. Same rhythm. Same weight. I glanced to my left and nearly lost my balance. Something moved between the trees, keeping pace without effort. Tall, solid, no longer half-formed. Its limbs stretched with confidence now, joints bending smoothly, purposefully. The eyes reflected light even in shadow, steady and alert. It didn't chase, it escorted. "You leave," it said, not out loud, but inside my head. The words pressed against my thoughts, heavy and undeniable. "But you remember." "I will," I whispered, breath tearing out of me. "I swear." The creature drifted closer to the trail, forcing me to veer away from the direction that led back toward the hollow. It was hurting me now, guiding me toward the outer edge of its territory. Every time I slowed, the pressure increased. Not pain, warning. The ground shook beneath my feet. Not an earthquake, something deeper. Like the forest was settling around a new truth. Trees swayed without wind. Dirt shifted. Somewhere far behind me, the hollow collapsed inward with a sound like a deep breath finally released. The Skinwalker stopped. I took 3 more steps before I realized the pressure was gone. The air felt lighter. The forest, normal. Birds burst into sound all at once, loud and frantic, like they'd been released from a cage. I turned. The creature stood at the edge of the trees, no longer advancing. In full view now, it was unmistakable. Tall, human-shaped, but undeniably wrong. Its skin looked thicker, stronger, like it had settled into this form for the long haul. The eyes locked onto mine one last time. Not angry, not grateful, final. It raised one hand, not to wave, not to threaten, just enough to let me see the shape of it clearly, to burn it into my memory so there would be no doubt later. Then it stepped back. The trees closed around it, swallowing its shape in layers of shadow and bark. The forest shifted once more and it was gone, not vanished, hidden, exactly where it belonged. I stood there shaking, listening to my own breath, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I walked the rest of the way out in silence. When I reached my truck, my hands trembled so badly I dropped the keys twice. I didn't look back when the engine started. I didn't stop driving until the road turned to pavement and the trees thinned enough to let the sky breathe again. Even then I knew. I hadn't escaped. I'd been released. And as I drove away, one thought settled in my chest, cold and permanent. The Skinwalker hadn't followed me because it didn't need to. I was already carrying exactly what it wanted me to take with me. I didn't tell anyone what happened out there. Not the rangers, not my coworkers, not my family. I finished the paperwork, marked the area as unstable terrain, and recommended it be left alone. No trails, no development, no reason for anyone to go looking. The report was accepted without question. Places like that don't need much of an excuse to stay forgotten. I left that job not long after. At first, I told myself it was because I was tired, burned out, ready for something quieter. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I couldn't stand being alone in the woods anymore. Every patch of trees felt like it was watching me back. Every stretch of silence felt too familiar. Years passed. Life moved on the way it always does. I got older, slower. The world got louder. But some things never left me. I still smell copper sometimes, even when there's no reason for it. I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, sure I've heard someone walking just outside my house. Sometimes I hear my name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken calmly from just beyond where the light reaches. I moved houses twice, changed towns. It didn't matter. The feeling followed. Not close, never close enough to prove anything, but present. Patient, like something checking in from a distance, making sure I was still remembering. I don't dream about the hollow anymore. I don't need to. I see it when I close my eyes. The circle of bones, the empty space waiting. The way the creature looked at me, not with hunger but with certainty. Like it knew our paths had crossed for a reason that didn't end when I left the forest. Here's the part I've never said out loud. I don't think it let me go out of mercy. I think it let me go because I was useful. People like to believe monsters are mistakes, accidents of nature, problems that can be solved if you shine enough light on them. But some things aren't meant to be exposed. Some things exist because they've learned how to survive us. And survival means adapting, learning, letting someone walk away so the story can spread quietly instead of loudly. So fear keeps people from digging where they shouldn't, so the land stays undisturbed, so it can keep sleeping. I've noticed changes over the years. Little ones. My reflection looks strange sometimes if I catch it in bad light. My voice doesn't always sound the way I expect when I hear it recorded. And once, just once, I found muddy footprints outside my back door that didn't quite match my shoes. They were close, though, too close to ignore. I don't think the Skinwalker followed me home. I think it knows it doesn't have to. I carry the memory. I keep the silence. I warn people away without ever telling them why. In doing that, I do exactly what it wanted. I keep its resting place safe by making sure no one ever looks too hard. So if you ever find yourself deep in the woods and notice the forest go quiet all at once, if the air smells like metal and the ground looks used instead of wild, don't go searching for answers. Some things aren't lost. They're just sleeping. And sometimes the worst thing you can do is wake them up.